I started my study with Filipino migrant mothers in France way back in 2005. At that time, actually, when I did not know that there were many Filipino migrants in Paris, particularly. And when I was doing a separate study about Filipino entrepreneurship, I encountered and meet many Filipino migrant women who were telling me that, oh, I have children way back home in the Philippines, but I need to work here so I could send some financial support for their education. And I heard many stories like this, so I decided like, okay, maybe it would be interesting to find out how these mothers fulfill their role as mothers and wives, or as a member of their larger kin networks in the Philippines while being away from home. I was wondering how could they carry on the emotional burden of being separated from their loved ones. And there were women I met, like they were separated from their children like during 18 years without seeing them, 20 years, and they did not decide to go to the Philippines immediately because going back there just for vacation, meaning it would be difficult for them to go back to Europe because they are actually living in irregular situation. So that was the turning point in my life as a researcher. Like for my doctoral research, I decided to work on Filipino migrant mothers. So you could see, we can see here in this slide, pictures of some Filipino migrant women I interviewed in Paris, and their stay behind family members, their children, their husbands, or their mothers, their sisters in the Philippines. And I took these pictures every time I finished my interview, because later on for example, with migrant mothers, I use these photos to show to their family members when I visited them in the Philippines, and ask them what is the impact of maternal absence, or the absence of their mother or their wife at home. So through that photos, I was able to make a certain links between migrant mothers in France and their stay behind families in the Philippines. And then after my field work in the Philippines, I also brought pictures to the migrant mothers of their stay behind families. So this was the focus of my study a few years ago, which was the basis of the book, and also that inspired the film Overseas of SOA. So before I discuss my book, I would like to introduce a bit the Philippines. So it is an immigration country in Southeast Asia. We all know that there is a very dynamic international migration from this country, even before the Second World War. So you could see in the red circle, where is this country? It is an archipelago of more than 7,000 islands. And right now we have a population of about 108 billion people in 2019. So these are some statistics about Filipino migration. So there are right now 10.2 million overseas Filipinos, and majority of them are permanent migrants in the receiving country. They either have long-term residence permits or the citizenship of the receiving country. And you could find the Filipino migrants in more than 200 destination countries and territories. Their major receiving countries are mostly Anglo-Saxon countries like the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and also countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, where you could find a lot of what we call care workers, Filipino migrant domestic workers, caregivers, nannies, working in this domestic work sector. There are also Filipino men who are also working in some cases in this care sector. So these are the statistics from the Commission on Filipinos Overseas. So this international migration, as I said a while ago, has started even before World War II, but was institutionalized by the Philippine government way back in 1974 when the government of Ferdinand Marcos introduced a labor code encouraging the exportation of Filipino labor force, what they call excess labor force, to solve or to address the economic problems in the country. It was introduced as a temporary program, but now we all know that it's no longer temporary and become a permanent economic strategy of the country. And you could see below this slide that in 2019, Philippines ranked fourth, according to World Bank, in terms of remittances. The country received like 37.2 billion US dollars. So you could imagine that how this Filipino international migration reinforce, support the Philippine economy. So, yeah. So now I will introduce my my book that inspired the film Overseas. So this book came from my doctoral research from 2005 to 2008. And this doctoral research focused on the family dynamics of Filipino migrant mothers in France. It was inspired also from the observation that many studies about women domestic workers were focusing a lot on their labor, for example, labor situation, without analyzing that being a migrant workers have also an impact on their family dynamics. It has an impact on the intergenerational relations between migrant mothers and their children, and also on the long distance conjugal relations between mothers and their husbands. So I titled the book as Mère Migrante Sans Frontières, like Migrant Mothers Without Borders, because most of the mothers I interviewed in Paris were actually in irregular situation. They had been living in France for longer time, as what I said at the beginning of my presentation, without seeing their children. So these women were trying to fulfill their caregiving role to their families, even though there is this state frontiers impeding them to go back and see their children. So I carried out this study in the 16th district of Paris, a bourgeois neighborhood, where you can find many embassies, consulates, and business offices. And many Filipinos, women, men, are working in this neighborhood. So you can see inside the oblong, red oblong shape, the 16th neighborhood of Paris. So in this district, you can also find the what we call the Philippine chaplaincy and also the Filipino church. So the Philippine chaplaincy is a central place of gathering for many Filipinos. It has many Filipinos who are looking for jobs in the domestic sector, usually pass there and ask their compatriots if they know some opportunities in the labor market, or if they are looking for apartments or small rooms to rent, they also go to this place. These are other places of congregation, so always in the 16th district. There are two, at that time, there were two dry goods stores in one street near what they call Victor Hugo Place. And you could see the picture on the lower left side corner of the slide. It is the Philippine Embassy. And on the lower right side corner, it is the so-called Filipino church. So many Filipinos go there to attend masses and celebrate different moments of their lives as migrants in France. So I interviewed migrant mothers, like 35 migrant mothers in France, and their stay behind families, 40 family members. I interviewed children, young adults, and minors, and then their husbands, and also women, the women in their kin networks who took care of their children, usually grandmothers and sisters. So my study was interested in this question, why these women, why these mothers decided to migrate and work abroad, why not their husbands? During my interviews, what I observed, they have different reasons, and majority of them told me that to improve the family's living conditions. These women were mostly university graduates. Some of them had already professionally valorized jobs in the Philippines, but they were complaining about the salary that is not enough. It was not enough to support the needs of their families, particularly their children's education. So in the Philippines, tuition fees at the university level or tertiary level of education is very costly, and many parents are worried that their children could not go to university if they do not have enough economic resources to support them. So that's the second reason why they decided to migrate. The third one is to escape from or to solve conjugal problems. So Philippines is one of the 2 states in the world where absolute divorce is impossible. So there are a few women who confided me that they had a lot of problems with their husbands. There were also cases of domestic violence, and migration was for them is a sort of divorce for their husband. By deciding to leave their families, their children, they were able to get rid of their problem with their husband. So this is the third reason. And the fourth one is a few women who were curious to see the world, to travel. And in the Philippines, it was very difficult for them to get visa, like tourist visas, to go out of the country and go around the world, because you need to prove that you have economic resources, enough economic resources, and that you would go back to the Philippines after. But by, for example, through their familial networks, friendly networks, and also through the help of some recruitment agencies that usually disguised as travel agencies, they were able to go out of the Philippines. So among my informants, many of them told me that they used the what we call a tourist visa channel to be able to come to Europe, meaning like they paid a lot of money, like almost at that time, in 2009, it was like 10,000 euros, almost 1 million euros. They paid for this travel agency, or quote unquote, to be able to go to Europe as tourists. And then after 3 months, they decided to stay in Europe after 3 months that their tourist visa expired. There were also cases of women from the Middle East who escaped their employers when they went to Paris, meaning the employers would like to take vacation in Paris with their domestic workers. And then these domestic workers met some Filipinos in the park and who told them that, the situation in Europe, here in France, is much better than the situation in the Middle East. Why not stay here? So through the help of other Filipinos, their fellow Filipino migrants, they decided to escape their Middle Eastern employers. So how could we describe the life in migration of these women? You can see in this slide 2 photos. I always found this kind of decorations, altars in the small apartments they call the Chambre de Bonne of Filipino migrant mothers I interviewed. I call the first one altar of religion, and usually beside this altar of prayers, you could find also an altar of family where you could find the pictures of their children when they were young. It's like different stages of life of their children when they graduate from university or from high school, some pictures of their family members. Or you could see here a doll that the mother brought actually with her when she left the Philippines, just to remind her about her youngest daughter. So these 2 altars made Filipino migrant mothers strong, emotionally speaking, by reminding them that, yes, my children are there, we're there in the Philippines waiting for my return. So I need to endure the difficulties, the hardship of life here in Europe. So how did these mothers fulfill their caring role, their mother role to their children? So during my field work in the Philippines, I also visited the children, grown-up children, young adult children in the homes of the migrant mothers. And you could see I took this picture because the daughter of one migrant mother I interviewed showed me this corner, telling me that all the things that you could see there, the toys, decorations, came from my mother in Paris. And in one interviews with young adult children, they were even joking me that, oh, my mother, she used to send us boxes of gifts. And when you open the box, these boxes, you would be surprised because you could find like big garlic or some soap or toilet papers that we could find even here in the Philippines. But yeah, so this kind of stories, you could see the intention of the mothers to also share to their children some objects that they find fascinating, different from the ones you could find in the Philippines. So that's why I took this photo. Aside from sending gifts, sending remittances, migrant mothers also regularly contact their children at that time by a phone. They were also using this kind of telephone card. And then some women started to use the internet, Skype, or if they have this Facebook, they were also contacting their children through those communication tools. So it is also a stereotypical view that it is always the migrant mothers who tend to share or to express their love and care to their children back home. My interviews with many migrant mothers and their children showed that family members stay behind also exerted efforts to fulfill or to express their care and love for their mothers abroad. So you could see in these pictures some of these expressions of love. First, the picture on the upper left side corner of this slide are like drawings of the grandchildren of a migrant mother. Some photos sent to her by her children to show the young grandchildren. And then you could see the picture of an old Nokia phone. At that time, it was very popular. And one migrant mother showed me a picture of her children there in her Nokia phone. And she said that, in 1 week, they called me 3 to 4 times. So I have always regular contact with my kids. And then the photo on the lower left side corner of this slide, you could see it's actually, how can I say, a video recorded during a celebration of an event in the Philippines, and it was sent to the migrant mother by her sons. And then the migrant mother played this video in her small room in Paris. So she showed me what is inside in one of these video recordings. And then the photo on the lower left side corner of this slide is actually a greeting card from the daughter of this mother holding this card. It's actually during Valentine's Day, she sent a card for her. So there is what we call a circulation of care in these transnational families. So what are the effects of migration on the family? So my study concluded that there are multiple effects of maternal absence from home or the migration of mothers from home. First, on the family unit, at the beginning of my doctoral research, I supposed that the migration of Filipino women, the Filipino mothers, would modify the traditional gender roles in the family. I thought that fathers who would assume a lot of care work at home when the mothers or when the wife left, but actually it's not always the case. The usual arrangement that I observed was that the grandmother or the mother of the migrant mother or the sister or the aunt were the ones who took care of or substitute, quote unquote, the migrant mother in her home. So there was this so-called upward social class mobility in the family, thanks to the remittances of the mothers. They were able to build a beautiful house in the village. In a few cases, they were able to buy like motorcycle, a car, or what we say, bicycles, all these kind of, and also modern technological gadgets at home, modern equipments for the kitchen, something like that. The impact of the migration on the migrant mother, I observed that there is this kind of contradictory class mobility. Like in the Philippines, they had upward social class mobility. They improved the economic and social situation of their family. But in France, even though they had university education, they ended up in this domestic work sector, and they could not practice their profession and use their university diploma to be able to access to more socially valorizing jobs, employment. And then there are a lot of emotional difficulties on the migrant mothers, and they were able to respond or to treat these emotional difficulties by turning to religion. Many mothers told me that when they were in the Philippines, they were not that religious, they were not practicing regularly their faith, but when they arrived in France, they started really to reinforce their Catholic faith. So they were very active in the church or in different religious associations. And then increased responsibilities. Yeah. A few mothers told me that when they left the Philippines, they were telling to themselves that, okay, I will just stay in France like during 6 years. After my children finished the university, then I would go back. But then it was not the case, because once their children left the university, they started to support also other family members in like the nephews, niece of their sisters, brothers, etc. And then their family members, their children, their husband started also to have other projects for the families. Okay, we're gonna buy that piece of land. Okay, we're gonna start a business. So the initial plan of temporary migration became in the long term a sort of permanent migration. And there were also migrant mothers at the beginning who became also migrant grandmothers. So after supporting their kids or their children's needs, university education, etc., when their children get married and have children, they also started to support their grandchildren. And then, yeah, as I said, they have this upward social class mobility, improved status in the family, and financial autonomy. Concerning the children, there are a lot of emotional and ideological gaps between them and their mothers. And we could observe this when the migrant mothers got or obtained their papers, like a residence permit in France, and then they were able to go back for the first time in the Philippines to see their children. And at that time, they were telling me that, yeah, my kids were uncomfortable to call me mama, something like that. What they call mama is actually my mother, something like that. So there were emotional gaps and also ideological gaps, like migrant mothers had certain expectations about their children. Children had certain expectations on migrant mothers, but then when they meet, they just found out that they were totally different in terms of points of view of life or projects for the future. So yeah, these are the important impact of migration, maternal migration on children. And there were also cases in which the children became spoiled brats, like some children were not actually able to finish their education. because of turning to drugs and alcohol, and became fathers or mothers at early age. Concerning the husband, there is, of course, emotional impact on the conjugal intimacy, on conjugal relations. And when the mother or when the wife left the husband to work abroad, the husband realized the importance of the wife's presence at home and her active involvement in maintaining the family, maintaining the households. So at the very beginning, there were husbands who suffered from low self-esteem, or sometimes what we call masculinity crisis. There were even cases that during interviews, a few men cried, telling me that if there were only possibilities for them to be the one to migrate abroad and work, they would just let their wife stay, and they would be the one to go and work abroad. This is probably caused by the fact that in the Philippines, the traditional gender roles are like this, that the mothers fulfill reproductive and care labor at home, and the fathers or the father is the one fulfilling productive labor, like breadwinning for the family. So it was very difficult for the husband to deal with the migration of their wife. So after that research on family separation between migrant mothers and children, I started another study, which is about family reunification. So when some migrant mothers in France obtained their papers, they were able to save more money. Some of them were able actually to make their children join them in France through the family reunification channels. And also, some of them resorted to the same channel that they used when they migrated to Europe, which was the tourist visa channel. So some children also found themselves in irregular situation as their migrant mothers. So this study, it resulted to this book that you could see in the other side, on the left side of this slide, which is entitled Mobile Childhoods in Filipino Transnational Families. It is anthropological and sociological studies of Filipino children who migrated to their migrant mothers, migrant fathers' countries of origin in different places around the globe, like France, United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, and the UK. So it shows different experiences of children, how they felt when they reunited with their migrant mothers, particularly migrant mothers in the case of France. And my studies showed that, yeah, there were a lot of emotional and ideological gaps between them and their mothers, and children too experienced a lot of difficulties in adjusting to their new environment, particularly the school system. And they, at the beginning, they were not, how can I say, they did not know how to speak French, because in the Philippines, the national languages in the Philippines are Filipino and English, so they are more like Anglophone. So they had a hard time adjusting in their new family situation and in their school system. And another aspect that I observed at that time is the difficulty for the children to be separated from the woman, the grandmother or the sister, or the aunt, their aunt, who actually took care of them when they were separated from their mothers. Usually in many studies about transnational families, like families of migrants, we always thought that, okay, family reunification will solve everything, all these problems about emotional distances. But actually, in this book, many researchers, many colleagues of mine, show that no, family reunification actually just, unveil the impact in a blatant way, the impact of maternal migration on intergenerational relations and on the emotional universe of the children. So that was the study just after the family separation. And yeah, right now my research is more on mixed couples and their children, of course, involving again Filipino migrant women, not in France anymore, but in Belgium. first question, among the 35 migrant mothers, 19 of them were in irregular migration situation. They had no papers at that time, but now, of course, they had a regular situation. And then among them, yeah, all of them actually, they like to go back to the Philippines. But there were two cases, two aged migrant mothers who actually returned already to the Philippines. But then when they returned, after a few months, they were telling me that, oh, I missed my friends, my association in Paris. So these women, all their children already finished their education in the Philippines, university education. They have all highly valorized profession in the Philippines, like doctors, engineers, something like that. But then these mothers decided to return to France and work again as domestic workers because they felt, yeah, they felt alone in the Philippines, and they miss their social networks in France. So it's not always sufferings that pushed migrant, can I say sufferings like economically speaking, that pushed migrant women, aged migrant women to leave the and what I mean is, sorry, I'm just to leave the Philippines and stay in France. There are also other issues more personal than that. At that time in Paris, I never encountered any cases about suicide, but actually it is in Belgium that I encountered cases like that, but not in the domestic work sector, but actually in the what we call international marriages cases, like Filipino women got married with a Belgian man, and they found themselves in a remote village far from the town, and they had no contacts with other Filipinos, and they became depressed and, yeah, resorted to suicide. But I never heard any cases of suicide among migrant mother domestic workers in Paris at that time. The cases that I encountered about deaths is mostly like connected to overwork. Like in 2008, there were 3 Filipino migrants. 2 of them were women who died of overwork. Like one had a cerebral attack because she was like working Monday to weekend, from morning to evening, nonstop. And she got this, kind of cerebral attack that we could only find, for example, in Japan, where many people were working like hell. And then the second case was a migrant man, Filipino man, who were also working like hell and had a heart attack. And the third one is a bit aged woman who the story was like she was budgeting a lot her money to be able to send to the Philippines, and she mostly eat eggs every day or noodles every day. And she also died. I don't know the reason. So at that time, 2008, there were like mobilization within the Filipino immigrant population in Paris. And this mobilization was started by the Philippine Catholic Chaplaincy. And they were trying to have awareness raising about the importance of health and the importance of reducing the number of hours of work, because some women in Paris like could work like 5, 6, taking 5, 6 different part-time jobs during the day. And in Paris at that time, Filipino migrant domestic workers were the highly paid. And I think until nowadays, they are the highly paid domestic workers. So there is also some kind of hierarchization of domestic workers. I think in Luxembourg, you could also, I think, observe that Filipinos were the so-called Mercedes-Benz of quote-unquote domestic workers. So these migrants were working very hard to earn their living and also to send as much as possible to their children. I also remarked the different approaches, the difference between irregular migrant mothers and regular migrant mothers, like those with papers. So irregular migrant mothers, they had a lot of stress, like they tend to send all their money back home because they were afraid that if they would be interrogated, arrested by the police, they would be deported immediately and they would lose their savings. Unlike regular migrant mothers, they had savings in the bank in France, and they also participate in the so-called paluwagan or tontine, like economy, like savings in a group it's called I don't know how to explain that. Like each month they give, for example, 100 euro, they save it, and then one person would act as a treasurer, like the keeper of the money. So if someone from the group would need some money for their projects in the Philippines, they could, for example, next month, and one member of the group would be given, for example, 5,000 euro, for example, and then it continues. They take their turn and they contribute. So they have this kind of informal economy, informal way of savings. I also remarked that there are also this black market of what we call it, money lending. We call it 5-6 in the Philippines. Like you borrowed 500 and you need to return 600. There were many like this. So many Filipinos who are in a precarious, irregular situation, when they found themselves in difficult financial situation, they turn to this kind of black market of money lending. So regarding Filipino migration to France, what I could see is there is a promising future for this Filipino immigrant population, because when I look at the case of their children who were born in France, or those children who reunited with their migrant mothers, they are actually doing good a lot in school, in universities, and they were able to integrate well in the French labor market. So they are the ones now who are like telling during my interviews, like, yeah, we are trying to go out of domesticity. Like our parents or my mother's generation would not able to get out of that, but us, the second generation, the Filipinos, French, they are French but Filipino origin, they speak very well French, and a few of them could not speak, of course, the language anymore of their mother, but yeah, they are the one leading the way now. So I think there is a need for a study, like research about this young generation of Filipinos, the second generation. How do they integrate in the labor market? And of course, in France right now, they said that there are about 50,000 Filipinos, but still there are majority in irregular situations. So maybe we could wonder, like, why it's all the time like stable since the late 1980s until now. There are still many irregular migrants. Actually, those who came in the 1980s, 1990s, and until now, many of them got already the papers, the regularization, but there are newcomers who come using the tourist visa channel, or who came from other European countries, like from Italy, during the economic crisis, and they would like to find opportunities in Paris or in other cities in France. They are the ones now who are like counted as irregular migrants. So the new ones, the pioneer migrants, they're already stable in terms of legal, how can I say, permits or residence, and many of them also obtained the French citizenship. Right now, I'm starting a new project on this issue about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the lives of Filipino domestic workers in Belgium, not anymore in France. It is a collaborative international research project. In this project, we will be all studying the situation of Filipino migrant workers in the care sector in different countries. So we have Canada, Belgium, Japan, we have also the UK. So it's just starting, so I cannot say much about it, but I look forward to sharing with you the results maybe next year in another event.